All right, today we're going to learn about the discriminant and how to use it. And let me start by reminding you guys what we just learned about, or we just reviewed, and that's the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula, you see it on the screen in black right there, and it's a formula that'll let you solve any quadratic equation that's in standard form, n equals to 0. Now basically what the discriminant is the little mini formula inside the square root. That's what we call the discriminant right there. So again, the discriminant is the part of the quadratic formula that's inside the square root. It's the little mini formula, just the b squared minus 4ac part. Now what's good about it is it tells you what type of answers they're going to be and how many. So let me start with one. I'll say, we know that you can't take the square root of a negative number. That doesn't work. So if the discriminant, which is inside the square root, is negative, that means there's no solutions. So if you're doing the quadratic formula, instead of doing the whole big messy equation, if you start with just that little part first and you say, okay, well the b squared minus 4ac came out negative, there's no solutions. I don't have to do the rest of it. And it actually tells you more. So first of all, when you're doing the b squared minus 4ac part, let's say you want to do it on your calculator, which probably a lot of people want to do. If b is a negative number and you're squaring it on a calculator, make sure you put it in parentheses. If you don't, it actually comes out wrong. So here's the difference. So let's say we had some question where a was 2, b was negative 3, and c was negative 4. If I wanted to do b squared minus 4ac, I want to make sure I type the b squared part in like this. I do negative 3 in parentheses squared. And the reason is negative 3 squared means negative 3 times negative 3, and that should equal a positive 9. So that right there should come out to 9. If I type it like this, it won't. If I type it like this, it'll come out as negative 9. Because remember, calculators are programmed to do order of operations, just like we do when we do problems, and exponents come first. So if you type negative 3 squared with no parentheses, the calculator says, okay, let's square the 3. 3 times 3 is 9. And then let's make it negative, and you get negative 9. But if you put it in parentheses, remember order of operations, parentheses come very first, even before exponents. So negative 3 in parentheses means negative 3 times negative 3, and the answer is positive 9. So don't type this one here. If you ever want to do a negative number squared on a calculator, if you type the one I circled in red, it's going to come out wrong. Always make sure you put it in parentheses. All right. So let's go back to the discriminant. Here is everything the discriminant will tell you about your answers. So if the discriminant comes out as a perfect square, now a perfect square means any whole number squared, so that could be 0, or 1, or 4, or 9, or 16, or 25, any number squared, like 9 times 9 is 81, that's a perfect square. So if the discriminant comes out 81, then what you get is 2 answers with no square roots. And the reason for that, let me show you what's happening over here. The quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus square root of something all over 2a. So what we're saying is, if I get a perfect square, like let's say I get an 81, well, what happens is the square root of 81 is 9. So the square root part actually disappears. And what you get there is just the number 9. So you're getting 2 answers with no square roots. Okay, so let's say we get a positive number, but it's not a perfect square. So let me go back to what I had before, where we had our blank square root here. And let's say I get like 7. Well, 7 is not a perfect square, so the square root there is not going to disappear. It's still going to be part of your answer. So you're going to get two answers again, and this time they are going to have square roots in them. Now, the reason for both of these that you get two answers is because of this plus or minus right here. Remember, a plus or minus means two answers, one with a plus and one with a minus. All right. Third choice. This is the one I told you guys about on the last slide. If the discriminant comes out as any negative number, let's say I get a negative 20 right here. I don't even need to do the rest of the question. The square root of negative 20 means no solutions. You can't do that. No real numbers. So if you get any negative number at all, there's no answers. Now the last possibility is if you get a 0. So let's say I did the discriminant and I got exactly 0 here. Well, the square root of 0 is 0. And what happens, the plus or minus ends up disappearing, because if I have some number, whatever negative b is, and I do plus 0 or I do minus 0, that's the same answer. Adding 0 and subtracting 0 is nothing. So if you get a 0, this whole part disappears, and you actually end up with just one answer. It's the only time when you don't have a plus or minus anymore, so you only get one answer. So those are the different possibilities. I gave you some examples. I kind of drew them over the camera, over me. But what you want to do is remember these four things here. So if I do b squared minus 4ac, and I get a perfect square, I know I'm getting two answers, no square roots. If I get a positive number that's not a perfect square, I'm going to get the messy answers, two answers with a square root. If I get any negative number, there's no solutions. And if I get 0, there's exactly one answer. So let's try this out. So here we have an equation. Let's answer this one. Let's figure out how many solutions it has. So when I look at the problem, first of all, I notice it's equal to 0. Just like when we were solving, it has to be equal to 0 for this to work. And I'm going to pick out my numbers. I have a equals 2. I have b equals negative 3. And c equals negative 5. And I'm going to do b squared minus 4ac. It's a little hard to see. Let's get a better color here. Okay, so when I do b squared, b is negative 3, minus 4 times a is 2, and times c is negative 5. And I said, remember, for this part, you can do it on a calculator if you want. Just make sure you put that negative 3 in parentheses, because I'll show the work. Negative 3 squared is 9, and then negative 4 times 2 is negative 8, and negative 8 times 5 is positive 40. So you end up with 49. Now if you had typed that in on a calculator without putting the parentheses around the negative 3, it would have been negative 9 plus 40, and you would have thought the answer was 31 instead of 49. But basically, I got a positive number that is a perfect square. 49 is 7 squared. So my answer to this question, I asked how many solutions there are. There are 2 solutions. And I didn't really ask you this, but let's add it in there. 2 solutions with no square roots in them. We're going to have either whole numbered answers or fraction answers, but not radicals in our answer. Because it was a whole number over here. Whole number with a perfect square. Whole number that is a perfect square. Let's do one last example, and that'll be it for today. So same setup. How many solutions does the equation below have? Now, what I did differently here is I gave you a question where we have a 3 here instead of a 0. And that was just a reminder for you guys, just like when we were solving, that needs to be a 0. So before I do anything else, let's subtract 3 from both sides and cancel that out. And we have x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Now I can pick out all the important information. I can say a is 1 this time, b is negative 6, and c is 9. So let's do our discriminant, our b squared minus 4ac. So this time it's negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. That would be positive 36 minus 36, and we get 0. So the discriminant is 0 this time. And what that tells me for our final answer here is this has one solution. Every time you get 0, it's one solution. Every time you get a negative, it's no solutions. And anytime you get a positive number, there's two solutions, and it kind of depends on whether it's a perfect square or not to decide which type of solution it is. So basically, that's what the discriminant does. It helps you know what kind of answers you're going to get before you actually do the work to find them.